Hey, I'm ZSH Plays. Welcome to the forest. We're starting a brand new area in the zoo today based on the woodlands of Europe. You can see here, there's a new drone cam in the sky so we can keep track on our progress. Let's go. Here's the view from the drone. You can see the three main habitats that this area is going to comprise of. And the first thing I want to do is get all the terrain and the paths done and plan out exactly how this area is going to work. Because we've got a lot of terrain changes to do here, I'm not going to put actual paths in to begin with. We're going to draw them in with sand so that we know exactly where they're going to go. As we change the terrain paint will stay, so we're still going to be able to see all of this once we start putting in all the hills and valleys that we want in here. This is where the entrance to the area is going to be, and then these two paths at the top will join it up to our African area. I want two paths going in and out of there. It's a big area of the zoo. And then this path here will take us round these habitats so that the guests have a choice of which way to go as they come into this area. And then we're going to add a path here down past the reptile and amphibian house, and finally a path here to connect it up to the Madagascar house. Alright, let's plan the habitats. So we're going to have 3 habitats and an exhibit in this area, and we're going to use different terrain paint to mark those out. So we've got some dark soil here, and then we'll use some of the lighter soil for this habitat, keeping roughly to the size guides I've put in, and then finally some rock for this habitat here. This large one is for the red deer, and the first one with the dark soil that we did is going to be for wild boar, and we're going to build both of those habitats today. Let's take a look at the drone cam. There we go, everything laid out nicely. Time to get the terrain in. The key to smooth terrain, as we know, is to use the transport trick to get some smooth gradients in. So this path is going to go up at an angle of about 3 degrees, and then we're just going to wind it round the path guides that we painted in so we get this smooth slope going up here. And then once we get level with the deer habitat, we'll flatten it out and carry on around this path here, and then once we get past the habitat, we'll bring the angle down and start getting the path to go back down to ground level again. So this whole area is effectively going to be on a slight rise in the terrain, and then there's going to be a big hill in the deer habitat as well. We'll do the same for the other paths, and then we can delete those bits of track, and we have the beginnings of the terrain for the area. One of the key things I want to achieve in the deer habitat is to get a hill at this position here, so we can get some shots of the stag looking majestic stood at the top of the hill. We're going to frame them with trees as well. So we're going to start getting a realistic hill in here. We're going to leave that little trench you can see between the path and the habitat, because we're going to have a stream in there, and just makes everything look really nice and adds a bit of movement to the view as well for the guests. The story of this forest is that this is one of the original features of the zoo. It would have stood here for hundreds of years, and the zoo have basically retained this part of it rather than flattening it. So ever since the zoo opened back in 1850, there will have been a forest here with some sort of habitat in it. Probably pretty simple wooden fences back then, and now we're going to upgrade it to a really modern forest. That's the basic terrain work done. Let's take a look through the drone cam. You can see where we're going here now. It's time to start planting. We created this area of forest way back in the elephants episode to use throughout the zoo. Basically a mixture of arrowwood bushes, some foxgloves, and a few European temperate trees and shrubs. And this little group is going to comprise the majority of the forest in this area, and then we're just going to go in and add way more trees. One of the other things I really want to achieve in this area is for the guests to feel completely immersed in the forest, and the main inspiration for that, same as last week actually, is Tiergarten Schönbrunn in Vienna. At some point in that zoo's history, they acquired a large area of forest that joined onto the boundaries of the zoo at that time, and I think they came to an agreement with the government where they would take over that forest on the condition that they wouldn't remove any of the forest, they would just add habitats to it, and that feel is what I want to replicate here. It's looking really nice already, and we've got trees completely surrounding that first path. We need more though, so we're going to use these trees and keep adding these to the blueprints that we just put down until we get a really dense forest. When guests are in here, I want the feeling that all the habitats are basically just clearings in the forest. Obviously they'll have fences around them, these aren't wild animals, but that is the vibe that I want the guests to have when they're in here. Okay, it's probably about time that we actually built something. So this is the only thing in here that's actually directly taken from Tiergarten Schönbrunn. They have lamps throughout the forest which are built into dead tree trunks, which I really like the idea of. So we're going to use these African painted sticks and one of the Australian lamps, just make a few changes so we can get a really natural looking trunk with the lamp attached to it, and then we'll use some other pieces to make the lamp actually look like it is fixed on to the trunk. And there we go. These are going to go all over the area. Let's move on to the fencing. This is the entrance to the forest, and we're going to do a little bit of theming here. This is going to be pure theming, so we got some gates in there. Even if they were closed, you could drive a truck through the gap. They are just there to look good and to sort of set the scene that we are entering more of a European foresty area. And then we're going to use the new fences from the America's Animal Pack, our first generic wooden fences in the game, would you believe? So don't want to waste those. They go quite nicely with those gates as well. And then it's time for the sign. This is the same beautiful font by Weiser that we used for the Hjordiger. It fits really nicely for this forest area. And we can also do something that's always fun, use a piece we've never ever used before, this tree from the Arctic pack. And with that done, we can move through the forest to start building our first habitat in here for the red deer. We're going to path our way from the entrance to the habitat. So we're going to be using the natural path so that the sand that we've put down will be replaced by more sand, which is actually a path that the guests can walk on. We'll curve that round past where the deer habitat is going to be built, and then we'll start building the habitat. We're going to deepen that trench that I spoke about earlier here, and then put some water in it. It's going to be really shallow. We're going to have tiny little waterfalls in here as well. It'll just look like a stream running through the forest, and then we'll get our first tree in, and we're going to purposefully place it so that the roots are sticking out of the ground slightly, and then augment that with some strangler fig roots to get that edge of a stream kind of look. We'll put a few more trees in, and then we'll start using the mossy rocks to get away from the bare terrain at the edge of the stream. Once we've just got little bits of the rock poking out like this, then we can start duplicating that along there. That adds some interest. And then we'll move on to some of the faux rocks. We'll use these to make the bed of the stream. So we're going to have some larger rocks here where the little waterfall will start. And then as we move them along this area, they'll get lower and lower. And then eventually we'll start using the smaller faux rocks as well and keep getting those lower and lower until we've got this realistic looking stream bed. And we'll put one of these special effects pieces in at the top to create the start of the waterfall, and we'll put another one in towards the bottom just to add a bit of movement to the water. It's so shallow you can barely see it, so I want to get some special effects pieces in just to sell that a bit more. Next up, we'll add some of the ground cover that we often use to add some more variety to the bottom of that stream bed. I want this to be really, really natural looking when it's finished. We're going to drop some of the tropical plant panels in, some creosote bushes, some of the grass panels, anything to get some green on the edge of those rocks there. We can even use some of the basket ferns. They look just kind of like the ferns that you often see in European forests if we sink them down in there. We'll do a little bit of terrain painting and roughening just to get this looking a bit more natural. And then we'll get the two trees in that are going to frame the deer when they stand on top of the hill. And then it's time for the grass. So we're going to be using 3 different types of grass in this habitat. The buffalo grass that we always use, plus the dring grass, which we haven't used for a long time, and some of the Yorkshire fog grass as well. We're going to have patches of different grass throughout the habitat to give it a really natural look and a bit more visual interest. The dead creosote bushes are really useful as well, just to have a little bit of dead branches poking up here and there like you see in forests. All the grass will be sunk down to a greater or lesser extent till it looks the way that we want it to. And then we can add some rocks to the hill. Just dropping in a few of the standard rock piles that we use throughout the zoo makes it look so much more solid, so much more structured, and so much more realistic. We'll just move some of these bramble bushes around to sit those rocks into the landscape a bit better. The hill is really starting to come together. Let's jump up into the drone cam and see how the whole area is getting along. Even at this stage, it's kind of hard to tell where the forest ends and the habitats begin, which is exactly the effect that we're looking for. Let's turn the beginnings of the deer habitat into an actual habitat with some fences. We're going to go with the basic chain link fence here with one modification, and then rely on foliage in front of it so that it essentially disappears. It's off at the back of the habitat. There's a hill in front of it as well, so we don't need anything too fancy back here. We'll just replace those posts, which I always think never look strong enough to actually hold the fence up, with some logs, and then we'll drop in some of the shelters that we originally built for the Tarkin, because they're going to work just as nicely for the deer, and they've got that nice generic look which works well in a forest anyway. And then it's on to the enrichment items. We're going to add the Scotch pine scratching post to the tree that we've already got here and use those bushes to blend it in. That gives the deer a reason to go up the hill, which is where we want them. We'll add one of the suspended feeders onto this tree here, and then we'll put our standard herbivore feeder in here and just get rid of the top so it doesn't have that African look. That's the deer habitat finished. Before we move on to the wild boar, we're leaving the forest to add in a surprise animal. Here we are in front of the Madagascar house, and last week I said I wasn't entirely sure what to do with this part of the big lawn that sits in front of it next to the gibbon island. Well, I've decided what we're going to do. We're going to add a free roaming peafowl The peafowl is such a classic animal, not just in zoos, but in stately homes and parks. And I think one of those is going to look really good right in front of this Madagascar house on this giant classic lawn. So we're going to fill this area with null barriers, and then we're going to hide a keeper gate under our dodo statue here. We'll paint the grass back in that got removed by placing down the habitat gate. Make sure the dodo statue completely covers up the habitat gate itself. And then we just need to make sure that our peacock has something to eat. Drop a couple of feeders into that conveniently placed flower bed next to the cherry blossom tree. And because we're in sandbox mode, escapes are off, that is all we need to do. And now we can say hello to Percy the peacock, who will now live on this lawn and strut about looking impressive and just generally increase the classic vibes of this part of the zoo. Let's get back to the forest and start building the wild boar habitat. The key to a good looking habitat for pigs is mud, lots and lots of mud. We're going to raise the ground here so it's level with the path, and again leave a gap in, a much bigger gap this time, so the pigs can actually get down there. It also keeps the boar away from the guests, because wild boar can be pretty nasty. We'll smooth all the terrain off, put some trees down to give us that clearing in the forest look that we want. Once we've got all the trees where we want them, we can take a look at it. This is already starting to look like a nice little clearing in the woods. All it needs is some fences and the rock work we created for the deer. There we go. These are all fences we've used before, although I've added some wire into the front one. Now we can start making it look properly muddy. We're going to do that by adding a forage box into the middle of the habitat, and then we're going to start adding in the mud bath enrichments all the way around it. So we're going to get as many of these as possible into the habitat. You can only place them within a certain distance of other enrichment items, so a little bit of fiddling around will get that in. We've got one at the front here, which is completely destroying the terrain, so we just drop a couple of pieces of path down, and then we can put it down without affecting that terrain, and then just delete the path. We'll sink it down a bit as well, so the mud bath is level with those rocks in front of it. There we go. Once we've got rid of the path, that's going to look really good. And now we need to sink them into the terrain. So firstly, we'll use the push brush to remove the wooden edges of each enrichment item, and then we'll go back in with the pull brush and bring the middle out of it as well, so that we can have as much mud as possible. I'd like to blend it in with the heavy soil, but unfortunately the colour of the mud bath is really light, so we'll have to blend it with the light soil instead, which doesn't look quite as muddy, but it gives us more of a dry kind of look, which I guess in the warm climes of Central Europe where this zoo is based is probably more appropriate than the soggy wet mud that I'm used to seeing in England. We're going to bring a big tree into the centre of the habitat to provide shade and just look nice. That'll go next to the forage box there. We'll put a tree guard around it as well. Wild boar love to strip the bark off of trees. And then we're going to add a load more detail to the ground in here. We'll go around with the tropical leaf piles, put loads of those everywhere. They're really good for softening the edges of the forage box. We'll cover the whole thing in faux rocks and then sink them down so they're just poking up through the ground. That'll give a lot of variety to the ground cover. We'll also go in with some of the individual faux rocks as well. So if we get the smallest ones and just dot these all over the habitat like this, and then we'll get one of the slightly larger ones in as well, put those in a separate group a bit further back, and then we can just select them and drop them so just the very tips of each rock is poking through, and we'll put some branches and things like that in there as well. We'll just place them in with random rotation all on so they're sticking up in all different angles, and then we'll go in and rotate them so that they sit naturally into the ground. We'll add in one of Lion's signs, a slightly different one this time. I'm using slightly different signage in the forest just to give it a bit of a separate identity. And then the last thing we're going to do is put one of the fruit feeders down at the bottom here. Not a fan of the bright yellow colour, so we'll cover the top of it up with one of these wooden posts. Put a base in at the bottom to make it look a bit more stable, because wild boars are powerful. And that is the boar habitat done, and the first part of the forest done. Here's the view from the drone cam. Let's get in there. We're only halfway there, but this is already starting to feel like a forest, I think. Here's the wild boar habitat. One of the boar just making their way down to the little depression at the front where their food is. Look at the big male asleep in the forage box. Obviously just had a big meal. I feel like you can almost smell the mud from here, so I'm really pleased with that. Let's make our way around and check out the red deer. It's a very obvious trick, but if you want something to look impressive, then put it up high, and it will do. And this stag and one of the does look pretty impressive stood on top of this hill here. This is the view that the guests see. Let's take a tour of the whole area. I cannot wait for the rest of this forest to be filled in. Once we've got all the rest of the trees and the paths and the other habitat, it's going to be so dense in here. I think it's going to be really, really cool. We've got a big habitat to build next week and an exhibit as well. I'll leave it up to you to guess what's going to go in there, but the habitat is for an animal we've never built for before. I am really excited to get them in here. Here's our progress today. That is a big area of the zoo filled already. Thank you for watching as always. Thank you to those of you who've joined the Explorers Club. We are on to side 3 of the monolith now. Hit the join button on the channel if you want to see your name up here, and I'll see you again next week for some more Planet Zoo.